Thanks very much. Yeah, so Nida Al Fulaij from People's Trust for Endangered Species, and I've run and managed our grants program. Sorry, I'm missing my first slide. I don't know what happened. But anyway, so I've run our grants program for many years. We're a UK-based wildlife conservation organisation, but we fund lots of work, research and practical conservation on species around the world and also in the UK as well. So I'm talking to you today about the role we can play in encouraging the use of and gathering evidence, as been mentioned already quite a bit by others. And predominantly I'm focusing on summarising a paper that we submitted earlier in the year to Ecological Solutions and Evidence, and that we as representatives from 18 different funders based around the world. So what role can funders play? Well, PTS has been one of many of conservation evidence advocates or champions for many years. So we're one of the funding champions, and as part of that remit, we've agreed to ask grantees to check for evidence in their grant proposals and focus on evidence where they can and work with other funders and practitioners to see where we can collaborate and change common practice. So as advocates, we've agreed that if we can embed evidence, asking for evidence and generating evidence as part of our funding protocols, we can begin to do what Bill's been talking about and everyone about changing common practice. And we hope that the impacts of that will be to improve our collective funding impact, enable communication to learn and adapt within the conservation community. We've agreed that we can provide guidance for grantees and help them understand what evidence is, and also provide them support so that they understand how to gather robust evidence as well and to communicate it. So we've been working together over the years, funders and practitioners, and come together through multiple meetings and workshops to discuss how we can improve practice, raise awareness and share our findings. Bill mentioned one of our papers previously, but one of these other ones, funding and delivering the routine testing of management interventions to improve conservation effectiveness, was the funders and practitioners coming together to discuss, how much funding should be apportioned within project funds to test interventions and what can we do about it. And a bit of a quick burst research before that meeting showed that out of over 1,200 publications, only 21% had a conservation practitioner listed as the author. So anyway, on the back of that workshop, funders pledged to be more open to receiving applications that included testing as part of the projects, to commit to fund a certain number of interventions each year, and to also provide support and training as part of that process. We also produced this other paper, co-designing a toolkit for evidence-based decision-making as well. And that describes many ways and means that we can collate and share evidence, encourage and improve testing throughout the conservation world, strengthen expectations that people will use evidence and generate evidence, and also build capacity within the conservation sector. So what role can funders play? So the who are we of the authors of the paper, sorry, which was on the title slide, but anyway, I can share that with you later. We are representatives, as I said, from 18 funding organisations from around the world. We come from government agencies, from family philanthropic trusts, endowment funds, supporter-based grant-giving organisations and other not-for-profits. And, we've got our own objectives. We've got a wide variety of remits between us, which vary, but obviously there's a lot of overlap in what we want to support and what we want to see. So We're looking to inspire new audiences to reconnect with nature. We want to fund national conservation leadership, especially in areas where people haven't got as much access to funding. We want to support passionate experts who value nature and wildlife. We've been looking to invest in the best ways to protect endangered species within their natural habitats. And also we want to restore natural ecological processes and populations and habitats. Funders, like all other organisations and institutes, obviously have our own challenges that we need to take into account when we're thinking about asking for evidence and supporting evidence. Some of us have sources of funding that means that it's difficult to, support certain projects, or we might have restrictions. We might lack internal expertise. We might have to go to external experts at the IUCN or our scientific colleagues. And of course, we also face time constraints as well. So those are all things to bear in mind. So asking for evidence and designing an experiment, how do we do it? So some funders, my slides have, there's the title slide. So that's the title of the paper we've submitted. Moving on. I think, here we are. This is the right slide now. Okay, so we've obviously, between the 18 organisations, we've got many different ways about how and when and what we ask for in terms of evidence. So many of us, 15 of the 18 organisations actually ask for evidence kind of upfront before, the application process starts, whereas the Endangered Landscape and Seascapes programme, because they commit more funding and have longer term projects, they're able to work throughout the application and project process to build capacity at that stage. Many of us have application forms, which within this paper, hopefully once it's been accepted, you can see we've got in the supplementary information what we ask and how we ask for, but we're kind of very happy to share that information. DEFRA's Biodiversity Challenge funds, for example, they ask their assessors to score the level of evidence that's provided and make sure that it reaches a certain threshold before the application's accepted and funded. Whitley Fund for Nature have a two-stage process. So they kind of challenge their applicants to justify how they think that evidence is going to support the objectives that they're laying out within their project. People's Trust, we give guidance on how to look for evidence, predominantly at the Conservation Evidence Database, but elsewhere as well. And then we ask the applicants to make a judgment call on how useful they found that evidence. And we ask them if they've altered their application or what they propose to do on the back of that. So we mentioned as well, again, the different types of evidence. So, in the first instance, is there evidence that the problem that you're trying to address actually exists? Is there evidence that the proposed intervention that you're planning to do that's going to relieve some human wildlife conflict actually works? Have you provided evidence that you can judge the quality of that information? Have you made a judgment call on whether it's appropriate for your project and in your context? And then on a broader scale, which I'll touch on a bit, can you demonstrate, more broadly beyond the programme or the project, how your organisation uses evidence for decision making? So Alex already shown this slide, but I'm throwing it up again. As a good example of how a funder, the Endangered Landscapes and Seascapes programme, asks their applicants for evidence. So they could ask them about the assumption that they've made. So here someone's assuming that livestock guard dogs will reduce predation by wolves. And then they say, where did you find that evidence? Did it come from a scientific paper? Is it expert opinion, personal experience? What does what does that information tell you? What are you assuming from that? A review found that 2 experimental tests showed guard dogs were effective at preventing attacks on livestock. So then they asked the applicant, could can you assess the relevance of this evidence, and can you assess the quality of this evidence and rank it, whether it's high, medium or low. And then that's giving a funder some kind of knowledge about the understanding that the grantee or applicant has. Slides. So obviously we've mentioned the fact that evidence might not exist for an intervention that you're planning on doing, and in that case, you know, there's low information on great apes. You know, for many species, there's very little. There've been very little studies and synthesis done. Or you might have some relevant experience that livestock corrals have been effective, but actually it's not on there. It's not in relation to the predator that you're looking at, or in the context. So there's a lot of times when we as funders are approached the support work where it will be really beneficial to collect data and collect the evidence, and then we're aiming to get them to evaluate it and share that evidence as well. So funders such as Mossy Earth and Natural Cambridgeshire, and I think Mossy Earth is speaking later, talking about how they're encouraging grantees to collect baseline evidence, so that they're looking at a baseline scenario and then comparing it to what they think will happen with a project scenario, and how the situation will improve. People's trust. We're building our guidance, so we're working with the conservation evidence teams. We've come up with this table that we're going to give to our applicants as well, which will help them to judge the relevance and quality of the evidence that they're looking at, and it will help us to understand whether they understand the evidence and what's available. So we ask them, you know, what's the exact action that you're going to be testing? What difference will knowing the answer to this experiment make for the future effectiveness of your management of that particular species or habitat? So here someone's going to put up a predator-proof fence to reduce predation by snow leopards. We check the existing evidence. Has the experiment previously been carried out? So you can see here they've judged, yes, you know, the work has been done in some instances, but not in this particular context. So it's unclear if it's going to be effective here. So then we move on to talking about what Alec was mentioning about designing a good experiment. So, you know, is there going to be a control or a comparison? How many replicas are you going to have? And so, you know, there's some guidance here about how to do that. And then we ask them about their methodology. What is it you're going to do? What are you going to carry out? How will you collect the data? Who's going to collect the data? How long is the data going to be collected for? And then how, you know, critically, is that going to be analysed? Who's going to do that? And where are the findings going to be shared? So I think the slides have muddled up a bit as well. So going on to this one, and then I'll come back. So we've talked about providing funding for evidence, assessing evidence for particular projects and programmes. But obviously some funders like to fund organisations, and they like to give unrestricted funding. And that, of course, throws up a huge number of different challenges. So the Helvellyn, a family foundation, has got these other criteria that they're looking to refine and to enable organisations to get support from them in becoming more evidence-based, while understanding that this is kind of a big challenge to do. Obviously, we're going to hear more about that later, about UK-based organisations doing just that. But how can they provide more information and guidance so that organisations better understand what evidence is and what funders would like to support? How can they learn if they haven't got their own examples in-house? How can they assess an example project to understand how to critically evaluate evidence? And how can we ask them to demonstrate where and when they consider using evidence is important? I'm just going to check if I know where. Okay, so as part of, I mentioned that at PTS we ask we ask our grantees to go to the conservation evidence database and look for evidence and then let us know where they found any. But we found, as previously been mentioned, this is a really difficult process and people need more assistance. So last year we've trialled holding conservation evidence workshops online in partnership with the conservation evidence team. And so we're holding an hour-and-a-half online session. We've asked people previously to fill in details about who they are, what their project is, what is it that they're aiming to do, so that we've got some knowledge about this. And then the idea is to kind of hold their hand a couple of months before the application deadline and really spend some time telling them what it is we mean by evidence, where they can source the evidence, how they can judge whether it's relevant or not, and importantly, if the evidence isn't there, how can they set up, a useful experiment? And so we're aiming these predominantly at new applicants, but we're also inviting current project leaders along. This is in the very early stages. This is really experimental. This year we've invited Rufford to promote these workshops to their grantee applicants as well, and I'd be very happy to expand that if any other funders are interested. And so last year we had just over 30 delegates. This year we already have 60 registered for 2 workshops next month, and as you can see from the list of countries there, we're having good representation from around the world, which is fantastic. So it is a bit of trial and error, and I'm sure in 2 or 3 or 5 years' time, these workshops will look completely different, but it's about learning what it is we can do to help the grantees in their preparation and their project design, and as support for follow-up from the workshop. We're providing them the Bible of conservation and other information. So going back to our paper and what the funders have learned and what it is that we recommend other funders do and invite you to join us. Requiring evidence as part of the application process has increased the number of practitioners who provide information, which is great, and also as we reference conservation evidence on our websites and within the application process, that has improved the quality of our applications, and it's also helped us in the review process. But as has been pointed out several times, evidence is lacking for certain taxa, so we know that supporting further evidence gathering is critical. And as I said, in terms of our workshop and other innovative measures, engaging with the applicants before they even design their projects and during the application process is really key to enabling them to understand what it is we mean by evidence gathering and generation. We've touched on the Endangered Landscapes and Seascapes programme, and there are others. Matt was talking about their longer term funding for key species. It is easier for funders that support larger and longer term projects, both to require their grantees to provide and generate evidence than it is for, we're guilty of those small scale funding models. We give out a lot of 2-year grants and it is really difficult. Also, of course, some projects that are looking to create habitat or restore ecological processes, when generating evidence to evaluate whether these measures are successful can take years and go beyond the lifetime of the funding of a project. So it might be that additional funding is needed for longer term monitoring, and that's obviously something we've been talking about and it would be good to talk about further this afternoon. And we've mentioned again barriers for people for whom English isn't the first language, or maybe even internet, access isn't as easy or as stable as it is for us. So there are many things to consider to overcome. And so finally, within the paper, we made some recommendations for conservation funders, some of whom might be in the audience today. And so we suggest that it benefits funders and the funders organisation and positively impacts our own objectives by asking the people that we're giving funding to for evidence. The funders, we recommend that funders consider adopting the approaches that we've outlined in this paper and other approaches that we can talk about later and discuss. We recommend that funders ensure evidence is also incorporated into their own decision making and not just required of the people that they're funding, and that we talk with one another and communicate regularly and learn and adapt. PTS works closely with a group of other funders, Whitley and Rufford, ZSL Edge, and at the moment we're aligning our language to the conservation standards language in our application forms and our reporting requirements, because obviously we think that's important for the people that we're supporting. We want to help practitioners access, assess and present evidence. We think that considering evidence, it's important to look at how we can make considering evidence in conservation planning routine for all of us. Various training materials are being developed and what they are and how we can make use of some of the tools that Alec was talking about, and adapting them into different languages or for different practitioners is really key, I think. And so it's important that we continue to talk and share examples. And I would just like to acknowledge and thank all the other authors on the paper, many of whom are here today. Thank you.